So again, welcome everyone. We will be recording this session and it will be later posted on our Startup PMD YouTube channel. So those of you who couldn't join our live session, you will be able to watch there, and or if you would like to rewatch it again. So again, welcome everyone, and I would like to extend a very warm welcome to today's speaker, Laura Neuman, who has a fascinating entrepreneurship journey. Laura Neuman is an entrepreneur. She also was elected public official, and she is currently serving at the University of Maryland as entrepreneur in residence. So thank you so much, Laura. Laura today will talk to us about a very interesting and fascinating topic on how to pitch investors. And I've seen Laura coach entrepreneurs from where they were completely unprepared to where they were completely prepared and went on to impress investors and actually raise money. So thank you, Laura. The floor is yours. Just wanted to remind everyone that if you have any questions, please submit them via the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. And at the end, there will be more time for Q&A, but in the meantime, please keep sending those questions. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you, Alla. It's great to be here with everyone today. Thanks for joining us for this workshop. This is one of my favorite subjects. And I will say that, I've spoken to many different audiences on this subject, and I've gotten a lot of pushback recently saying it's not really a pitch. Well, if you're going out to raise money for your company and the goal, look, there are a lot of ways to raise money. One is to get a customer. That's the best way to raise money. That's still a pitch. But if you need venture capital, angel investment, or any kind of investment in your company, you need to understand what the audience is looking for when you go to tell them about your idea. So I love talking about this because I am an entrepreneur. Entrepreneurship, I just think, is the greatest thing that we do in our economy. And so I want to be helpful in that process. So we're going to jump right in. This first slide, I know it looks pretty plain, and I want yours to look plain too. The goal of this first slide, which we'll call slide 1, is really to sort of take a moment to set the stage for what you're going to share. And so on this slide, when it's your presentation, I want you to put the name of your company, who you are, perhaps your title, and who you're presenting to, and that's about it. And then we jump into the next slide. The most important thing in your presentation is this slide. It's slide number 2, which is really your first content slide. And on this slide, I want you to think big. Now we're going to come back to the background on who you're pitching to and why you're pitching and some of the things you want to remember in your pitch. But because I want you to do this, I'm going to do it too. The goal at the beginning is to think big. What does think big mean? Well, it means that I want you to stop your audience in their tracks. I want you to make them really think about what you're going to discuss in your presentation and why it's important to them. And so, every time I meet with an entrepreneur and I sort of go through their slide deck, it's always the same thing. This slide, which is slide number 2, your first content slide, I get a lot of interesting, this is who we are, this is why we're in business, this is what we've come up with. Well, I'm going to give you a specific example from an entrepreneur I worked with of what I mean by thinking big. I want you to stop me in my tracks. Now, I've changed this a little bit to protect the entrepreneur, but this is the idea of what their first presentation slide looked like. We have a great new idea for heart transplants. Now that's a big idea, right? That is thinking big, but has it gotten your attention? Are you interested in knowing what they're going to say after this? I'm not sure it's really going to stop you in your tracks. This would stop you in your tracks though. To save a life, someone must die. This is one of the most profound shifts in a presentation that I've seen in my entire career. When you put a statement like that up on the screen for your audience, what you're doing is you're saying what we are doing in our company is meaningful, it is world-changing, and it will have an impact. That statement, to save a life, someone must die, stopped me in my tracks. It was one of the most profound things I'd ever seen in an investor presentation. That's the kind of thinking I want you guys to have when you're thinking about your slide deck. What kind of statement about what the problem is out there in the world that you want to solve will stop people from looking at their phone, talking to someone else, or doing whatever the 20 other things are that they have to do in their day. I want you to figure out what the problem is that you need to solve in your presentation with your idea, with your product that is going to really grab the attention of the audience. So what does that mean? That means use words that are impactful or use an image. You can use a picture to convey the same thing. Figure out what the problem is, find a picture that really conveys that problem, or come up with the words that really deliver the message of there's a big problem out there that needs to be solved, and we're the ones who can solve it. Now, a lot of investor presentations include a competitive advantage slide. It's somewhere around the middle to the end of the slide deck, and it usually looks like a matrix and has check marks or X boxes. I'm not a big fan of that slide. And I will say, I know everybody does it. It's pretty typical in investor presentations. I just don't think it's necessary if you've successfully conveyed what you have to offer. And in fact, I think it detracts from what you have to offer. If you have a competitive matrix slide in your slide deck and you have other companies listed on that matrix, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get on my phone and I'm going to start researching those other companies. And immediately I'm thinking about what they have to offer instead of what you have to offer. I believe that this slide, the one that says, this is the global problem we are solving, immediately sets the stage for your competitive advantage. Now, with the example I gave you, that particular entrepreneur has a way to use stem cells to regenerate a heart so that you don't actually have to use a human heart. You can use a heart from an animal and use the individual stem cells to create a heart and regenerate a heart for a heart transplant. Well, that is a huge competitive advantage. And immediately I knew that when I saw that presentation, because I understood what the problem was. And now the problem that's being solved is being solved with this new technology. You are setting the stage for your competitive advantage immediately if you can clearly explain the problem and then clearly explain how you address that problem. Now, you've all heard it a million times. The goal is to tell a story. People they're distracted. They're looking at their phones. I bet half of you guys are looking at your phones right now. That's what we do. We try to multitask. The best way to pull people into what you have to say is to tell them a story. And we talk about that all the time, tell a story. What does that mean? That means starting with something that grabs my attention, helping me understand that you get that problem and you have a way to solve it, and then helping me understand how you're going to come up with a product and put together the right team to make that happen. That's telling a story. And you must nail the opening slides. If you get the attention of your audience with your opening slides, you'll have them for the rest. And as I said, the goal is to, if they put their phone down, if you're giving your presentation and you can get them to put their phone down, you've got their attention. So, when you're thinking about this global problem and this global solution that you've come up with, that is really the foundation for the discussion and for the story that you're going to tell them. And remember, they're wondering, wow, this is an entrepreneur with a great idea. Do they understand how to not only solve the problem, but then create a product or productize a solution for that problem? And that's what we're going to talk about here. It's very important to understand the difference between solving a problem. First, you have to create the problem. It exists. The question is, can you clearly articulate it? Then you're solving the problem, but then you need to move into how you've created a problem that makes it possible to build a business. And that's really what they're interested in. Can you, as an entrepreneur, make the transition from technology or an idea into a product that can be sold? So your job really is to explain how your approach solves the problem and then walk them into, this is how we've productized that solution. And if you're doing that effectively, you are again solidifying your competitive advantage. The goal in every slide is to make it clear how competitively you are better than any other solution out there. So we're around, the second slide is what's the problem? Third slide is what's the solution? The next slide is this is the product and this is the progress we've made in developing this product. So now you've got to transition into someone with a great idea, a brilliant entrepreneur, to someone who understands product development. And every investor is looking for this. It is essential that you help them see that you understand the importance of going from lots of great ideas to actually creating a specific product that can be productized and moved out into the market. This is demonstrating your understanding of product development. And I will tell you that, I'll say this subjectively, This is where most entrepreneurs run into the biggest challenges. They have great ideas, but they remain ideas. There's always another new idea or a way to perfect the existing idea. Investors are looking for you to turn this into a product and get it out to the market. One of the best ways to do that, by the way, is a demo. Investors love demos. They like to see how it's actually going to work. If you have a prototype, that's even better. And then you want to put specific accomplishments along the way. So maybe you've developed a prototype and you want to articulate, this is how we developed the prototype, this is what it does now, and this is what it will look like in the next version. Those are the specific accomplishments they're looking for to understand that you know how to turn this into a product. So of course you want to make the opportunity compelling, but how do you do that? You know, this is really the market slide. And you guys have all heard about the market slide. Everybody puts up a market slide that says, this market is $64 billion. Well, that's not what investors are looking for. Sure, they want to see a big market opportunity. That's a given. You should assume that they're expecting that it's a big market or you wouldn't be there. What's more important is that you can give them specific information. So in every one of these examples and the details here, I'm trying to give you specifics of what they're looking for, not just globally. You want to specifically address what they're hoping to see in this slide deck. Now, a great opportunity to, or help them understand the market potential is to be specific. I have these partners. I've already signed up these clients. These government agencies have signed off on our technology. Those kinds of specific examples are stamps of approval. And you need that kind of approval for investors, because what it does is it lets them know that someone else has vetted this idea or this product. And nothing is better than media coverage. If you have any media coverage of your concept, your product, even of you and your visionary approach to solving this problem, that will be credibility that will last all day long. Data is good. Sure, if you're going to give them a $64 billion market size, make sure you've backed that up with some specific data. And by the way, be clear about where you fit into that huge market opportunity. My favorite way to do this is an ROI. If you can create a spreadsheet that demonstrates how your product provides an ROI to a potential customer, that's the most compelling way to demonstrate the value. That's more important than the size of the market, in my opinion, because that's a subjective number. The ROI is specific. So if you have a particular product and let's just say your potential customer is UPS. If you make assumptions about UPS as a customer and what your product can do to help UPS and put that all into a spreadsheet and demonstrate a return for that potential customer, let's just say hypothetically UPS, that's really valuable. It doesn't have to be a real customer. This is a sample ROI. It's a way of demonstrating if you use my product, then you will be able to get this result for this customer. Another very compelling way, particularly for tech companies, is to list the patent portfolio. You don't have to give all the specifics or details, but understanding that patents either have been filed, are pending, or have been approved, that's always meaningful because it speaks to the value of the company. So once a patent is granted, you've basically said, we have real value in this company, even if we don't yet have customers. So I always think it's worthwhile to include that. And then, of course, nothing's more valuable than a customer saying, I love this product, I'm willing to use it, and I'm willing to pay for it, because that's the best money you're ever going to get is from a customer. And finally, don't assume that your audience, your investor audience, understands your idea or your product or anything about what you're presenting. We have this idea that, investors, they've seen every deal. Well, they've seen a lot of deals, regardless of who your audience is. They've probably seen a lot of deals. And, they might have some awareness of your space, particularly if they specialize like venture capitalists do, but you shouldn't assume that they really understand your product or your market. And my favorite example here, and I love to give this example because it's such a brilliant one, is, I was running an RFID company. I had an investor come in, great guy. I loved working with him. One of the smartest guys I've ever met. He's still investing actively to this day. And he came in one day with a book under his arm. Now, I assumed that this guy knew more about my industry than I knew about my industry. It was RFID, radio frequency identification technology. And he walked into the office one day for a meeting and he had a book under his arm called What is RFID? Now, this is a guy who went to an Ivy League school, with a top tier investment firm and truly just a great guy to work with. But he was not uncomfortable saying there's more that I can learn about this technology. That's not typically the case. But more importantly, you shouldn't assume that your potential investor knows what you know about the technology. They have a learning curve too, and it's our job to help them understand the technology in a way that is comfortable for them and makes them feel like they're part of the process. Now, one of the other slides that gets a lot of scrutiny and attention is the financial slide. So, I jumped into this presentation with breaking down some of the specific slides, and that's for a reason, because that's the most important part of what we're going to talk about. These slides, some of them are kind of standard. One of them is a financial slide. That's a standard slide. What are you going to use? What are you going to do with the money? And what are your financial projections for success? There are a couple of things you need to know about this slide. I guarantee everyone in this audience is going to have a hockey stick that says our revenue is going to go straight up. And every investor who's going to see your presentation is going to expect you to do that. In fact, you don't even have to include it because they already know it's going to be there. Avoid the things that they are expecting and instead maybe go a little bit deeper. So let's talk about how to do that. Understand that when investors are looking at your financial projections, they're not looking for the hockey stick. They're looking for, do you as an entrepreneur and potential business person understand the assumptions that went into those financial statements? If you're building out financial projections, cash flow requirements, cost of building your product, potential sales, they want to understand that you understand what assumptions need to go into those projections. How much is it going to cost to hire people? How much is it going to pay? How much are you going to pay the lawyers? I mean, you have corporate costs, you have the patent costs. Have you built all of those assumptions into your financial projections? That is the most important thing to them. Do you understand what it takes to build this business? And so they see a lot of ideas, a lot of great ideas, but they fund the ones that they think are viable companies. And you are a viable company when you understand the assumptions that go into your financial projections and you put together a great team. So, this is one of my favorite points in the whole slide. It happens in almost every presentation. Someone says, we want to raise $10 million. I'll just make up a number. And I'm like, well, I actually was taught this lesson by a venture capitalist, and it was a little embarrassing to be taught this way, but that's how we learn sometimes. They're like, well, what do you mean you want to raise? Are you raising that amount or not? And so it undermined my credibility when I said I want to raise whatever the number is, $10 million. Instead, I said, this is how much we're raising, or we're raising $10 million, or whatever that number is. They want to know that you believe the number that you're saying. And if you're not confident about it, they're going to sense that immediately. So I'll give you a great example. I was in front of a top investor with a very big deal. I was raising $100 million on that deal, and they were going to invest $25 million. And so they asked me how much I needed in this meeting. I was in front of a board of directors at this top tier firm, and it was it was a pretty serious group. And I'm standing in front of the room. And they said, how much money do you need to build this out? And I said, $50 million without flinching. I needed $50 million. And I asked later, I went back to the person who invited me in for the presentation. I said, why did you ask that question? He said, I wanted to see if you could say it without flinching. So he was testing me. He's basically testing me to see if the number that I said I needed, A, I believed in and I was confident in, and B, if I was gonna hedge on it, then they were going to lose confidence in me. So be clear about what you need and say it with confidence. And by the way, whatever number you say, they're going to double it. So if you say you need 5 million, they're going to, in their mind, they're thinking they probably need 10 million. If you say it's going to take 6 months, they're assuming it's going to be 12. And so, a lot of these bullet points come from feedback from presenting to investors. But one of the things that I see in a lot of slide decks, so I had to include it on this one, is that, there's a lot of discussion about exit strategy in a company that was started 6 months ago with an idea that isn't patented yet. Exit strategy is not your goal, because they're not thinking about your exit strategy. They'll get there. They want to get there. We'll come back to that. Your goal is to build a great company. If you build a great company, then likely investors will be interested. they know there has to be an exit strategy. So you're taking valuable time talking about something that's not really part of the discussion yet. If it's a great company, the rest will follow. And so I encourage you to focus on that instead. So why create a pitch deck? I used to start with this. This used to be my opening slide. And I thought, gosh, I'm not really doing what I'm asking you to do, which is start with what's important. We were burying the lead. The lead is, how do you start your investor presentation in a very effective way? Well, let's move back to some of the details now, which is how to create a pitch. Why do we create a pitch deck? Is there a reason that we're doing this? If we've got a great idea, we want to, present it. I've read the stories like you guys have of someone coming up with an idea, waltzing into a top firm and pitching their idea without a slide deck and getting funding. That is not typically the case. That is very unusual. And in fact, there's a book called Startup where the guy shares that experience of creating the first tablet. That's not really how it happens for most of us. There are a lot of reasons for a pitch deck other than your presentation to your audience. It could be for a business plan competition or a private meeting. It doesn't matter whether it's for one or the other, although the type of pitch deck will be different. Even in a private meeting, the goal is really to organize your thoughts. So you want to put together this story about your solution, your product, your team that really, kind of captivates the audience, whether they're sitting in a big auditorium or they're sitting across the conference room table from you. Either way, it is a way of organizing your thoughts so that you can share the things that are really important with this potential investor. You want to make sure that they want to know more about what you have to offer. So, we're talking about some of the details that are high-level details in this case. There are separate slides and there's a separate presentation for due diligence. So this is really your initial meeting. Either in an auditorium or in a conference room, this is really about your initial meeting. What are the things that they want to know? And there are certain boxes you must check to make sure you've given them what they're going to want. They're kind of going to expect to know at the end of that meeting. Create the due diligence slides, create the detailed slides, but hide them, put them in the hidden category in your slide deck so that if you're in a meeting, if you're sitting in a conference room with a potential investor and you've gone through your slides for this meeting and they say, wow, well, I'd love to know more about your product development. Make sure you have those slides, but that they're hidden and you can unhide them. Then in that meeting, you have them ready to go and you can go another level deeper. So have all the information, but keep your initial presentation to a handful of slides. So when you're in these meetings and you're thinking about accepting money, for your company, first of all, whether you decide to go out and raise money or not, or you're just going to go for customers, which is really the best money you can get, you still need, in my opinion, to create this outline. Call it a pitch deck, call it an outline, but it helps to put together your thoughts on how you're standing up or setting up this company. So I think it's an important exercise either way. And many of you have done this with me on the phone or over Zoom. And every time we go through this exercise together, I realize, wow, this is a much more interesting opportunity than I initially realized, because when you lay out the slides for me, what I can do is see opportunity. But there are a couple of things you want to consider if you're looking at investor money. The folks that you're asking to invest in your company are forevermore your partners in your company. That will never change. They're not leaving until there's an exit. And so understand that in that partnership, if you're accepting money, what you're doing is you're saying, I am giving you some of the control in my company. And in some cases, it can be a lot of control. They want to know if you're coachable. This is probably one of their biggest issues. They want to know that you'll take advice from them. And sometimes their advice might not be the right thing for your company. I mean, there are plenty of examples out there. We could have a whole call on that alone, because I've talked to a lot of founders who are worried about that. And it's a valid concern. But you want to find a partner who you respect and who respects you, and understand that that's a relationship that is more of a partnership, and they want to know that you will take their advice. And ultimately, they will have influence over the board of directors, which means that those decisions will ultimately determine the future of the company. That board of directors, which will have a lot of influence from your investors, will then have final control over your company instead of you. And they will, of course, want to plan for an exit. That's a conversation that happens once they're at the table, once it's a partnership. Understand that investors are looking for a certain size return. They have a number in mind. So it might, for some investors, be a 5x return or 12x, but they have a minimum return that they're looking for on this deal. If they put in X amount of money, they're going to get X amount out. And if they can't do the math on that, then they're probably not going to invest. And then, of course, they want to know that you have very solid revenue projections over the next handful of years and that you have a path to achieving those revenue projections. So we're going to spend just a minute or two on each of the types of investors. Angel investors, obviously, great early money. These folks are usually very experienced, successful entrepreneurs. They still love that entrepreneurial connection, but they're not building their own company now. Maybe they want to help someone else build a company. Great early money. They also bear in mind, though, that they require a little more hand-holding because a lot of times they're not experienced investors. Sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. Just bear in mind that it's a different kind of partnership and it's usually a closer relationship. They want to take on more of an advisor role, has been my experience, maybe mentor advisor role. And in fact, they might also want to separately be compensated for that in addition to investing in your company. So just be aware of that. They tend to be pretty easy to work with generally, though, and a little bit more flexible. The institutional investors include venture capitalists and private equity. They are professionals. This is what they do. They raise a fund. They have a certain amount of money that they have to invest in a certain amount of time. And they need that fund to close within a certain number of years, 7, 10 years. Usually 7 is a pretty standard number. It could even be shorter, it could be 5. They want to know that they're going to invest that money in that fund that they've raised from other people's money. So a lot of venture capital investors will get money from pension funds, places like that. They'll put together a pool of money. They're investing in your company and many others, and they want that investment to pay off within a certain time frame so they can close that fund and distribute the returns to the people who invested in the fund. So they're basically the folks who make decisions about how to deploy that fund of resources that came from other folks who want a return. They have a lower risk tolerance than angels, but they can invest early. Sometimes they invest early, sometimes they invest later. There are fewer and fewer early stage venture investors. They are moving to later and later stages. They want to see products, they want to see revenue. They used to be the really early investors. Now that's moved to the angel category more so. Although there are a handful who will invest at an earlier stage, most of them are moving to the later stage. And what's interesting about venture capital investors these days, I don't think this was always true, but it is definitely true now, is that they usually specialize in a certain kind of deal. Health tech, fintech, cyber. You have to know what they're focused on and make sure that you are really spending your time with the types of investors who really align with your deal. So at the end of the day, consider them a partner because you will spend a lot of time with them and they will have a lot to say about the development of your company. And then finally, private equity investors. You know, I've changed my mind recently on private equity investors. I used to sort of shy away from those relationships because they're often looking for a transaction fee for helping you raise money, even if you raise money from them. So the private equity firm could be investing in your company, but they still want a transaction fee for that investment. And I've always kind of pushed back on that because I'm like, look, we're either partners or we're not partners. I don't want to pay you a fee to raise money, you know, even if it's from your firm. But I will say that they have a lot more presence in the marketplace today. And there are many more flavors now of private equity investors. I recently worked with someone who is a private equity investor and they do venture investment in addition to private equity. They'll acquire up to 95% of a company to help a founder cash out. They keep the founder in the company in an operating role so that the company continues to have value. But they also do early stage investing as if they were like venture capitalists. So that model's changing a little bit. It's not just transaction based, but in every case with a private equity investor, they're also thinking about the exit. And so that's going to be part of the conversation with them. The exit might be taking you, the entrepreneur, out of the deal, putting cash on the table for you, them taking over more ownership and control of the company, but you remain involved. Or they could acquire the company outright or ownership of the company and still have you contracted to them. So, you know, we used to start with the keys to a good deck. You know, we talked about what makes a good presentation. And, you know, I do want to touch on a couple of the what we'll call housekeeping details. I mean, we could talk about how to do this all day long, but there are certain areas I want to focus on. One was, what are the elements that must be included? And how do you think differently about those slides from, the standard presentation you get on, these are the elements of a slide deck? Well, there are some details that are important to keep in mind as you're putting those slides together. Obviously, it's important to tell a compelling story. If you haven't told a good story, then you haven't really connected with your audience. And part of that is personal. When you get to the part about your team, I never start with myself and my bio in an investor presentation, because even though I might be the most qualified person to build this company, what's important is the product that I'm coming up with to solve a problem. So that's what they really want to know about. But when you're telling this story, you want to weave some of your own personal history into it. So I'll give you a great example. The RFID company I mentioned earlier. We didn't start in that presentation with our bios, even though 2 scientists founded this company and had incredible backgrounds. That's really compelling, and it was an important part of the story. But we wove their background into the presentation, which made them incredibly credible. They were probably the most qualified people to build this company. And those qualifications became very personal qualifications, and experiences became part of the telling of the story. Opening with someone's bio is making it all about that individual instead of about the problem that you're solving. So organize your information accordingly in a way that's really going to get their attention. The purpose of the slide deck is to organize the telling of your company's story, which includes telling your story as well. My personal belief is it should never be more than a dozen slides. I actually think 6 to 8 is generally sufficient. But, I say a dozen max because different people have different presentations. And of course, the second slide, which is your first content slide, is the most important. If you get them on that slide, you're good. Make sure you have transitions between your slides. It's important in telling a story that you create transition. Okay, details, more about how to, put a finer point on some of your slides. You have to have white space on those slides, and unless it's a dark background, then you have more of that color. But you want to make sure that it's not an overwhelming amount of information. If you can't read it from a distance, then it's too small. The goal of this deck is really to get people to want to know more. You can create another deck or have other slides that are hidden with more detail, but you want to make sure that visually it's easy to follow. One of my personal favorites, I recently gave this presentation up in New Hampshire for a group of scientists. And I shared this particular point, which is to avoid underlines and italics and use bold sparingly. I can't tell you how many people came up to me afterwards and said, oh my gosh, I've got to change my slide deck because I have a lot of bold and I have a lot of underlines and a lot of italics. It's not that you can never have it. It's that you want to use it sparingly. Because if everything's bolded, then nothing's important. If everything's underlined, then nothing's important. And italics are hard to read. So if you use italics, use them sparingly. And you'll see there are 2 words that are italicized in this presentation. Now, I think it's important to understand when you're delivering your slide deck that, I'm like you. I'm just like you. I want to get all the information out. I want to make sure that you get as much information as quickly as possible from me. But understand that each slide should be about a minute in a presentation. I'm talking about a business plan competition, for example. Obviously, in an office, it would be a little bit more informal. But in a business plan competition, you put about a minute a slide usually. That's 125 spoken words. So you want to bear that in mind. And I know all of you have written notes for each of those slides because we all do that. Everyone does that. Make sure you put pauses in your notes like ... or create space, or, when you write it down, write down what you want to say. Make sure that you create a natural pause in the conversation, but then try not to read your notes. Once you've sort of gotten comfortable with that content, they can tell if you're reading your notes. It's better if you can deliver it without actually reading them and really know the material, because chances are you do know it. And this is also one of my favorite points, which is you're going to glitch. I promise you're going to make a mistake and you're going to think, oh my gosh, that came across terribly. And the truth is your audience will not notice. Everyone gets nervous. It is perfectly normal to get nervous. I don't think anyone doesn't get nervous. I don't believe anyone who says that they never get nervous. Everyone does. And everyone glitches. Everyone makes a mistake. And the truth is your audience barely ever notices it. You need to not worry about it because it's going to happen. Just keep on moving and be yourself. Don't worry about it. So I kind of want to ask if there are any questions, but we'll go through a couple more slides first. And remember, every sales presentation is a sales pitch. Every slide presentation is a sales pitch. It doesn't matter whether you're at a business plan competition, you're doing an initial pitch to an investor, or any scenario you're in, you are talking about the value of your company, and you are trying to convince your audience about the value of your company. So that is always the case, and you have to remember that every time you share your presentation. All right, it's not letting me advance. Let me try again.
Well, you should be able to.
Oh, there we go. It finally let me. Let me see if there we go. We're good. It just froze up for a second. So the 12 slides that I talked about, you can have up to 12. Thanks, Olive, for your help. You can have up to 12 slides, and I think 12 is the maximum. You can easily do it in 6 or 8 or 10. But I thought it would be helpful to give you sort of the outline of what those 12 slides would look like. The landing slide, of course, is the name of your company and you. In my case, it was how to pitch. And then the global problem you're solving, which needs to immediately start to frame your competitive advantage. When you're sharing a problem, you have to be setting it up for this is why we are the right solution for that problem. And then, of course, the third slide is your solution to said problem, how it's different, which is again about your competitive advantage. Every single slide should include or weave in your competitive advantage. If you've done that effectively, then you don't need a separate slide for that. Then, of course, you want to transition into the actual product. Demos are great. There are many ways to do that. And then market and why it's compelling. Please do not have a $64 billion market slide. Please be specific about the details in the market and why that is important or compelling. Partners are an important part of that. That can be a separate slide or it can be part of the market slide. And then, of course, how you're going to sell your product. Is it a direct sales model, a channel sales model? Does it start with seeding the market with direct opportunities and then following up with channel? Understanding your business plan is really important to your audience. But if you have a limited number of slides, that's one that I would let go of initially, because you're going to have that conversation at a later time. Of course, you've got to include your team. Pictures are always helpful. It helps us connect with the people who are on the team. And you must have some credentials on there that connect with your audience. Your revenue and budget projections, of course, in detail with assumptions, how you're going to use the money that you're raising, that you are declaring that you're going to raise instead of what you wish to raise. And then, of course, you never want to forget to say thank you at the end. And of course, I included room for an extra slide. So what is a pitch? What should it not include? It's not a detailed presentation. I'm asking you to go deeper on each of the slides, and you've probably seen in other presentations on how to create a slide deck. But I don't want you to go into so much detail that they're trying to read that instead of listening to you. The goal is to really listen to the presenter instead of reading the slide. It's not an opportunity to go into detail about how your technology works. Again, keep those slides hidden, have them available. Be prepared to have that conversation. But those slides should be hidden in the initial presentation, even in a meeting and in a conference room. And you're not gonna close the deal that day. That's highly unlikely. It's almost unheard of these days. There was a time when it did happen. It is not the case today. Investors are cautious buyers. They take time to get to know you, to get to know your technology, the state of development of that technology, and that decision is made over time. Finally, things to remember, these are the key takeaways. These are the things that every slide deck must include. What's the problem? How big is the opportunity? And how are you going to solve it? Are you talking about heart transplants? Or are you talking about the fact that you have a solution that means that people don't need to die for someone else to live when they need a heart transplant? That's a really big opportunity, and it redefines that industry. And how will you turn that into a product and build the product? How do you productize it? What is your plan? You've got to have a plan for how you're actually going to build this company, which is separate from your idea. You've got to build a company and you've got to demonstrate that other people believe in your idea. And that's traction through customers, partners, government agencies. The team is critical. No matter how great your idea is, they want to see that you have the right team in place. And that's not just the team that created the idea, but it's business experience as well. And whether or not that business experience understands what it takes to go from your idea to actually building a company. And then, of course, very importantly, you needed a starting point with your opening slide. Slide number 1 was a way of starting the conversation. And at the very end, you want to have a strong closing that says, I really appreciate your time. Thank you for being with me today. And so I say to all of you, thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Laura. This was a fantastic presentation, chock full of great advice. And so I do have one question, actually 2 questions here that have already been submitted. So if you haven't had a chance, please send your question in, or you can also raise your hand and I can unmute your mic at this point. There's a raise hand button in your controls, probably at the bottom of your screen. So the first question is, would you suggest that people watch Shark Tank to get to practice pitching, or is that unrealistic?
Oh my gosh, I love Shark Tank. First of all, let me say that. I enjoy watching it, and I will tell you specifically, I know of a company who, in fact, I know of 2 companies who raised money and then went on Shark Tank and raised more money. It does work. It is legit. It is the real deal. I didn't realize it when I was first watching, as just a typical member of the audience. And then I saw a friend of mine go through this process. They coached her as she prepared to present. They walked her through what to expect, and she negotiated a deal. And then one of the investors in that deal, I got to know pretty well, and they coached another company through the process on Shark Tank. So I've personally known 2 companies who have gone through that exercise. And when you raise money that way or not, it is very successful. And this is not an ad for Shark Tank, but the truth is that experience is real. So I would watch it because I think it's worthwhile to understand what you're dealing with. When those sharks are looking at a potential opportunity and they're challenging them and they're pushing back, and honestly, they're doing it in a pretty forthright way. Some might suggest aggressive. That's the real world. So what you see them doing is what you're going to experience with a lot of very seasoned potential investors. We all sort of have a kinder, softer approach these days. People want to recognize different kinds of investment now. We're trying to be more inclusive in our approach to investment in the entrepreneurial community. But the truth is, the really seasoned guys, they're not unlike the sharks on Shark Tank. So yes, I'm a fan and I watch. I think it's worthwhile. Great question. I've never had that one. That's the first time ever.
Yep, thank you. All right, so next question is, can our competitive advantage be what our competitors are doing wrong?
Wow. Okay, so that's an interesting way to phrase that question. I would flip it on you and say it's what you're doing right. So the more time you spend talking about what they're doing is less time that you're talking about what you are doing right. And so you can talk about them without naming them even, but say, this is the approach that was taken in the market and this is what we're doing that's differently. That's part of the global problem, right? The global problem is this is what's been out there that's not been fixed, right? This is the thing that many people have gone after this problem, but they haven't been able to really solve it. Or maybe there's been a solution that's not as big as the problem. And so we need a bigger solution. And this is our way of approaching that. So I think from the very beginning, you're saying, when you're talking about that global problem, you're laying it out there like, wow, if only we could solve this problem, which means no one else has. And then you come in with, this is our solution. And by the way, this is how we're going to turn it into a product. When you've effectively done that, you've basically blown everyone else out of the water. And you've said, nobody else has figured out how to do this. Now, not every product is big enough to really fit into that global perspective, but most are. And I would say, if you want to raise money, then you want to be thinking about something along those lines, something that is that big. It doesn't mean you won't raise money if you've come up with a widget. You still might come up with a widget, but the global problem is what the widget is still solving that nobody else has solved, even though it might not shift the universe, but you're still solving a problem, and you still might raise money and you still would be successful. So we see a lot of those on Shark Tank. So you want to be talking about your solution, not what other people are doing. But yes, you have to frame it in the context of what's already out there. And if you haven't done that, then they're not really going to connect with why yours is better. So that would be my approach. It's not that you should never mention them, because they're going to ask you at some point, they're going to say, who's your competition? And you want to have already positioned yourself as the best solution to the problem, no matter who comes up in the conversation after that. And so you can do that by talking about the industry, the opportunity, and then be honest. Just say, okay, it's this company, and this company. At that point, you have their attention. If you have their attention and they're asking those questions, it means they're engaged. And at that point, I'd go into detail. Okay, well, this company does this, we do that. This other company does this, we do that. And so every time you're positioning yourself vis-a-vis everyone else who is out there. And if you do that effectively, you have a very good chance of raising money. I also believe fundamentally that money follows opportunity. And, you know, I'm an entrepreneur. I've spent most of my career as an entrepreneur. I really love being in this space because I love the creation of opportunity. I've also had the honor of serving in public office. So I've seen the government side and I've seen the entrepreneurial side. I believe that being an entrepreneur is just the best path to opportunity in our country. But I will tell you, a lot of people are like, well, we need more money to invest in these kinds of opportunities or in this geography. And what I say every time is that, yes, from a government perspective, you can request those funds to invest. And, you know, if you can get that money, great. If you can get the state of Maryland to stand up a fund, which they've done, to invest in early stage companies, that's terrific. We do that through TEDCO. But the truth is, money will follow opportunity. So if you have a good idea, money follows opportunity. No matter where you live or who you are, it will follow opportunity. It's not always equally applied. We know that. Less than 2% of venture capital goes to women-led companies or people of color. We know that. That is changing. And so there are movements underway to commit funding to underserved groups. But fundamentally, if you have a great opportunity, you will be able to raise money if they really believe that you're the right team to execute on it.
Thank you, Laura. So here is the next question, and we may need clarification on that. Do your patents have to be for your own technology, or can you highlight patents for the technologies used in the solution?
I don't quite understand the distinction there. If you have a patent portfolio that is yours, which is separate, then that's part of your credentials. That's on the team slide, and that's about your credibility as the right person to help build this company. But the patent portfolio that's part of the market discussion is really specifically the patents that are for this company because they create value in the company. So that is part of what an investor is investing in, is that patent portfolio. And so you want to make sure that you're specific about the patents that the company owns, and they must be under the umbrella of the company and not in an individual's names or multiple individuals. They need to be owned by the company itself. That's a lot of the value that investors are looking for when they invest in particularly early stage companies. But if you have an extensive patent portfolio outside of the company that speaks to your credibility, or any patent work outside of the company that speaks to your credibility, I think that is a very worthwhile thing to share because it really does make you a safer investment for the potential investor. What they're looking for, people, they want to make sure you know your space. Like, do you know this world? Do you bring experience to this? Do you have enough depth in the technology? And then are you augmenting that with good business experience, either from yourself or from someone else on your team?
Yeah, thank you. And just to kind of add to that too, so you have to have either own patents or you have to have a license, so somebody else owns patents for which your technology needs to use. You should contact them and see if you can obtain a license from them. So that's
Yeah, that's a good point, Alan, especially with University of Maryland and the Department of Tech Transfer. So in some cases, it's not that the company has or the founders have developed this technology and patented it. You might have acquired a license to it, an exclusive license to it. That's also part of the overall value in the company. So just make sure you've well documented it because it's important, but we didn't really talk as much about the process of raising money and what that looks like. But one of the things to consider there is that there will be a due diligence process, which is when you really drill down on the technology and you go through something called reps and warranties, which is a way of sharing with your potential investor all the contracts you've entered into. And they're going to want to know that you've been thoughtful in protecting the company in those contracts. And one of those contracts could be licensing technology or being the licensor of technology, and that in that negotiation, you've protected the company or provided an opportunity for the company that increases its value.
Yep, thank you. So here's the next question. Is there a strategy you could share for those who want to maintain the majority shares in your company while partnering with investors?
I do. Find customers. The best way to maintain ownership of your company is to find people willing to pay for your product. Look, it does happen once in a while where there's this amazing new technology and it's worth a lot of money right out of the gate. I mean, quantum computing is a great example. Some of those companies have been valued at really high numbers without any revenue. But that's not typically the case. Usually investors are looking for the trade-off between risk and reward. So the riskier the investment, the more they're going to want to own of that investment because, they're putting not their money on the line, they're putting the money of the investors in their fund on the line. And so what they want is to find the balance there. If you have customers who are willing to pay for your technology, you've reduced the risk. But I've also seen deals where there are a lot of customers, but there's not really a unique technology idea. There's not a big enough opportunity there. Be aware of that as well. Just having customers isn't the solution. It's a little bit of both. It's how compelling is this opportunity and how protectable is it with patents, trademarks, and are people willing to pay for it? The more you have in each of those columns, the more of those boxes you can check, the more leverage you have in negotiating your deal for investment. So the riskier the opportunity, the more they're going to ask for. The less risky, the more willing they are to negotiate, especially if it's a unique opportunity and there are multiple investors. And I'll give you a great example here. When I was out raising money for one of the companies, very early in my experience of raising venture capital, I went to meet with someone in Maryland who had already raised money because in the entrepreneurial community, there's a real collaborative, collegial approach to helping each other. And I went to this CEO and I said, I got a term sheet for my deal. And he said, don't show it to anyone. Don't let other investors know who gave you that term sheet. And at the time, I was a little surprised by that. I'm like, yeah, but we're going to work with these folks. They're going to be our partners. And he said, you don't have any leverage if they know who gave you the term sheet, because then they're just going to call that person and say, hey, let's work together on this deal. And then you're cut out of that discussion. And it was great advice, some of the best advice I've ever had. If you can generate interest in your deal and get multiple investors interested, then you've got, a little more leverage in that negotiation. But if there's only one investor who sort of, it sparks for, and you don't have some of those other boxes checked, you don't have a lot of negotiating room. You really don't. But the more solid the investment, the lower the risk portfolio, and the more interest you have in the deal, the more leverage you have.
Thank you. Great advice. Here's a great question I think you're going to love, Laura. How do you approach assessing coachability? Any techniques?
Oh my goodness. I love this question. I've been called uncoachable in my career. Let me just own it right out front and say that I've been labeled uncoachable early in my career. It's not that I wasn't coachable, because I am. I literally am learning every day. I think I'll learn every day for the rest of my life. The challenge I had in that particular relationship is that that person didn't have much more experience than I did. And they were interested in certain credentials, like Ivy League credentials for them meant that you were more credible. And I came from a non-traditional background. Look, I became an entrepreneur because I wanted opportunity and I didn't have it. I didn't grow up in an environment where I was on a track to mentorship and the Ivy League. I grew up in a very challenging background in Baltimore City. My parents were high school dropouts. I was a high school dropout. I ended up getting a master's degree without finishing high school or college. I had lived out of my car. And those experiences weren't considered credible because they weren't traditional. But I had a very successful career at the same time. And when I set a goal, I achieved it. So the challenge was that there was a disconnect. This person had gone a traditional path that was available to him. I was on a non-traditional path, but that's what drove me and made me motivated and made me willing to work hard toward my goals because I wanted to prove I could do it. And when other people weren't willing to invest in me, I took a risk on myself and I bet on myself. And I put it all on the line. I put everything I had on the line to become an entrepreneur and to build a company. And I was very successful doing it. But the disconnect was his experience and my experience were very different. And so he thought I was not coachable. It's not that I'm not coachable. It's that you have to recognize this is what I bring and this is what you bring. And so if you're discounting my experience, then it's hard for me to connect with that. So just be aware that we've all been there. And just because there might not be that immediate connection, it doesn't mean that there can't be. So I have a tremendous amount of respect for that person today. I mean, they've done some pretty extraordinary things in their career. And I would hope that anyone who worked with me would see that, not only do I have a lot of experience, but I'm always learning. And so you've got to find that balance in there where there's mutual respect. And it can be difficult sometimes. But I think the best way to do it, there are two things. One is to make a personal connection. We are all out here doing the best that we can. And I think it's important to recognize that. But the second thing I did was I over communicated. When this person was uncomfortable with the level of risk he was taking because he didn't connect with my experience, I decided to over communicate. So I sent him information constantly because I wanted him to know constantly what we were doing. And the more information and the more I overly communicated with him or over communicated with him, I was trying to assuage some of his concern by giving him information. And he could decide whether to access that information or not, but I provided it anyway. And I did it willingly. And I'm glad I did it because it taught me to think about what he needed to have so that he could feel more comfortable in the relationship. And I'm grateful that I had that opportunity to have that learning experience. So if you're having that kind of disconnect with a potential investor, it's because they haven't yet either seen your experience and the value of that, or you haven't made a connection with them, or somehow you have to help them understand that you want to be a partner in this with them and that you are open and receptive to what they have to offer. Now, there are times where investors, particularly investors with a lot of experience, they'll just sweepingly to say, this is how I want to do it, or they'll make a decision about what that relationship is going to be, and they might not give you a chance to build that connection with them. That could happen. That might not be the right investor for your company. But if you come at it from a very genuine perspective, where you truly want to make a connection with people and you are willing to, do what makes them comfortable to build a relationship, because that is a part of the process, then often you can find that connection if they believe in your opportunity, if they're really committed to what you have to offer and they want to fund your company. They'll usually work with you. Now, sometimes they'll replace you, and it does happen a lot where maybe it's a disconnect and they just feel like you don't have the experience that's necessary to run the company. Once you bring those investors into your company, that is a risk that you take. You need to recognize that they can replace you. Just make sure that you've negotiated an employment agreement as part of that investment that protects you, and always, always try to keep a positive relationship. Even people that I haven't enjoyed working with or I've had a challenge with, I still have respect for them and where they're coming from. I don't take it, it's not personal. None of this is personal. They're doing the best they can and you're doing the best you can. And so you have to remove that from the equation. It's not personal. It's about the transaction. It's about getting your company funded. And that's hard for entrepreneurs because being an entrepreneur feels personal. I mean, you poured your heart and soul into this, and that feels personal. But you have to understand that the business side of it is not personal. They're just trying to make the best investment they can. They're trying to fulfill the requirements of their fund, and deliver a good return to their investors, which for them is a transaction. It's not personal. It's really about how we put all the points together so that we can make the best decision for everyone. So you have to remove that from the conversation. And it's hard to do that, but it is essential in order to build a relationship with your investor.
Thank you, Laura. And we have, I don't know if you have time for one final question. Are you currently accepting pitches?
I guess I don't quite understand what that means, accepting them.
So, so Edwin, if you're a University of Maryland, or if you're a student, faculty, or staff at the University of Maryland College Park, or Morgan State University, or Bowie State University, or University of Baltimore, so you are able to schedule time with Laura, and Laura can help you develop your pitch and hone it. But I'm not sure if Laura is necessarily accepting pitches for investments. There are investment groups in the state of Maryland that I can refer you to, but if you need coaching, Laura is available.
Yeah, you're welcome to reach out to me on LinkedIn or online somewhere. I'm happy to connect. It's rare that I don't at least say yes to an initial meeting because I really do want to foster this entrepreneurial support system in our community. So I often meet with companies and I'm happy to be helpful where I can. We can have an ongoing relationship through the university system or just connect with me directly and see if I can be helpful to you.
And I just posted the link, and I can also post the link to sign up for a meeting into the chat. So take a look. So I think that we're out of time. So thank you so much, Laura, and thank you so much to everyone who attended and asked lots of great questions. This was a fantastic discussion, and hearing it from somebody who has pitched, raised a lot of money, and also served as an investor and as a mentor. I think this is fantastic because you've seen it from all angles and from any perspective. So again, if you are student, faculty, and staff at the university, as I mentioned, you're able to schedule a coaching session with Laura and see if she can coach you. I've seen her do magic.
Thank you, Ella. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today. You make all this possible.
Thank you.